Welcome to ALD Stories, a series of conversations where we share the untold stories of atomic layer deposition and the people behind the technology. This podcast is brought to you by Beneq, the home of ALD. I'm Leah Lowell, your host for the show.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on the ALD Stories podcast. Today, we have a very special guest, Dr. Jan Macak from the University of Pardubice in Czech Republic. Hi there, Jan.
Hello, hi.
Jan, maybe we start with a short introduction of yourself. Could you say a few words about who you are and what you have been doing so far as a career?
All right, great. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a great opportunity for me to speak about me and my ALD research. I'm a material scientist, a senior researcher and group leader at the University of Pardubice. I work for a Center of Materials and Technologies, and the ALD we have is one of the key facilities we operate with. And actually, I have worked with ALD for about 6 years. And during that period, we have worked through many interesting cooperations and projects, and I'm happy to share some of these things with you today.
Absolutely. We want to hear all about the work that you have done. We'll get into that in a bit, but maybe start with a question of how did you become interested and what got you involved in ALD in the very beginning?
All right. I think it's quite cool actually in a way, because I'm not a Finnish, so I don't hear about ALD in a basic school. But I went as a PhD student to the MRS meeting in Boston in 2005, and on these material research symposia conferences, there are always tutorials on Sunday on the very first day. And Mikko Ritala, actually, Professor Ritala had a tutorial on ALD at that time. And I was about 24, and I was just shocked what he was talking about. It was incredible what he showed to us as students, and I was just impressed by the possibilities of ALD. And I repeat, this was 2005, so it's like 15 years ago. And then I was not, let's say, senior enough. I didn't have my own group until, let's say, 2014, when I could afford my own ALD, so that's what I did, and then only I started to really actively work in the ALD field. But I was waiting about 10 years for my dream to come true, to be able to have my own ALD and really develop the fascinating advantages of it, let's say.
So interesting that your origin with ALD kind of still had a Finnish connection in Professor Mikko Ritala, but to what you said about how you became interested, but you didn't have a chance to have your own machine or really get started with the research until you became a professor on your own, right? What was so I'm assuming then that your professorship came about in a different area. You were basically achieved something else. What was that, just as a background for our audience?
Well, electrochemistry. I began as an electrochemical material scientist. I have always worked with anodic materials, so I was growing during my PhD some nanotubular structures by anodization, especially anodization of titanium. And during this anodization of titanium, we were able to grow really fancy nanotubular layers of titanium dioxide, which have shown to have plethora of functionalities and possible applications. Nevertheless, it turned out that if we would put these nanotubular layers together with ALD, we could further expand the portfolio of applications, and we could actually use the ALD coatings for doing a great job with the tubes, like for catalysis, batteries, and things like this. And that's where I got impressed. And then that's the moment when I became very certain that the ALD will be the best tool for that.
That's interesting. That was your kind of aha moment.
Yeah. And I was actually inspired by many papers from colleagues from the field, like Matones, Cornelius Nilsch, Ulrich Gesele, And these guys that have worked in early 2000s, especially in Halle, they did lots of ALD in porous alumina, also porous silicon. And this was very inspiring to me. And basically what I was just doing was to expand this family of different substrates to these nanotubular layers and combining it with ALD coatings.
Would it be fair to say that your main interest in ALD is in these nanotube applications? Have you ventured outside of that, or have you started to do other types of ALD experiments?
Indeed, it started like that, but we have gone far beyond that. We are not doing ALD just inside or within the nanotubes. We have, of course, many cooperations, and we also develop our own precursors now. So it's not about nanotubes as substrates anymore. We work with different substrates of different nature.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about your main work, Eric. I mean, I know nanotube is how you got started, but that's something that I think when someone goes to the research world and looks up the work that you have done, that's probably what your name is still going to be associated with right now, I'm guessing. And right now, it seems like titanium oxide and what you refer to as TNT nanotubes are some of the things that you have already published on. Is that what drew your, so can you talk a little bit more about what you have done there?
Yes, I can. Okay, so here on this slide, actually I show some SEM images of the one-dimensional nanostructures we work with, in particular these nanotubular titanium dioxide layers, yeah, which are very interesting. And as you can see, actually they have, these nanotubes are different diameter, different thickness, so they have also different aspect ratio. And one of the, let's say, key things that we are looking at is how we can functionalize these nanotubes by very thin coatings, as shown here. And you will probably agree with me that it makes a huge difference if you look at the way the coating is done in the case of ALD compared to other routes like wet chemical routes or spin coating or something like this. And of course, the performance of the tubes will be completely different. So we're looking for really uniform and homogeneous coatings on these nanotubule layers, but in general, this would be also very reasonable activity on other 1D nanomaterials. But let's stick to the nanotubes. On this slide, I'm just showing some SEM images of different aspect ratio layers. So you can see that depending on the thicknesses of these materials, you can have aspect ratios over 1,000, which basically is sort of like extremely high aspect ratio. And basically, if you don't use the ALD, you are probably not able to do any coating of any kind in this kind of material. So ALD is a key here. And our first actually ever paper on this on the coating of these nanotubes is the one that I just show here, published in Langmuir 2016, where we tried in our first research effort to see if we can really homogeneously and uniformly coat the nanotubes by thin layer of alumina. And what we did was essentially very simple. We just gave enough time to the precursor to really go inside the tubes and react there. Same with the other precursor. And we were able to grow the alumina as we then inspected by proper SEM imaging, and we found that the alumina coating was actually present really everywhere inside the tubes. No matter whether you were looking at the top or at the bottom or in the middle, there was alumina absolutely everywhere. So this was a great step for us and a key message that if we do the ALD properly, in other words, if we tune the process to give enough time to the precursor to diffuse through the aspect ratio, then we will be 100% able to do very uniform coatings. And with that said, we then expanded the whole range of materials to different oxides, binary, ternary. We also did noble metals, sulfides, selenides, and we ended up basically in a situation where we have now covered a whole range of different approaches. So we took the tubes and we wanted to see if we can, for instance, make them catalytically more active. This can be easily done by decorating the nanotubes, for instance, by noble metal particles. And ALD is fantastic for that. You can grow uniform particles of platinum, palladium by ALD without any big issues. You can also for instance, do some coatings that are active in visible light. So you can make visible light photocatalyst, very effective one. You can also bring inside the nanotubes some other metal oxides like zinc oxide, tin oxide, and you can make very fascinating gas sensors. And there are many other applications. Actually, we summarized it in our recent review paper published in Applied Materials Today last year. And the amount of applications we could cover was actually amazing. It is really amazing what you can do with the ALD in combination with these materials. And I'm very happy, actually, just to finish this part, that many other colleagues around me from Poland, Hungary, and so on, Slovakia, got impressed by this, and they realized how ALD could be useful for them. And I think they are also now trying to purchase their own ALDs to be able to decorate or actually modify their nanostructures by ALD.
Yeah, and you know, you've been doing this for a long time. And stepping back a little bit, maybe you can sort of review, at least for somebody who's just getting started into this, why, for example, your interest in titanium oxide, what properties, why do we care about that? And then, you know, sort of walk through us, why is this such a, you know, flexible material?
I see. Okay, sure. Well, it's true that I jumped from the very beginning to the very end very quickly. So here is the pathway. So the tubes themselves are composed of high surface area nanostructured material, which is TiO2. And titanium dioxide is known for its especially photocatalytic applications. So if you shine light on TiO2, especially UV light, the TiO2 has the tendency to clean itself, to essentially anything that comes on the surface. This effect is called self-cleaning. It's pretty well known. There are many buildings in the world, in Japan, in the US, and anywhere, where you have paints which contain TiO2. And the TiO2 actually does the self-cleaning job. So the buildings, the cars, and everything are still kept relatively clean compared to buildings that don't have the TiO2, for instance. And so that's one. Second, we have, similar to porous alumina, a huge internal volume of the tubes. So the tubes have some internal volume, internal available area, which can be used as a host, as a matrix or scaffold for something. And they are reasonably conducting. They are not metallic. They don't have the metallic conductivity, but they are reasonably conducting. And because of they have high surface area, they can also sense very well, for instance. So they themselves are a good sensor. But if you make a heterojunction and if you put inside, for instance, a coating of tin oxide or zinc oxide, you will make fascinating heterojunction with extremely high surface area, which will be probably better than any other sensor that is today commercially available. And for instance, we have worked with some sensing groups, people that are really skilled in the sensor art, and they were shocked by the response, by the speed of the response and all these sensing parameters that we were able to show and achieve with these tubes. Yeah.
Very nice.
So I should also mention the battery use. As you probably know, battery during charging and discharging changes the volume. And that's actually something which you cannot really deny, but it's really unwanted because you can have some rupture. And basically when things like this start, that's basically the end of the battery. And these one-dimensional structures are actually very good hosts for lithium because they can relatively well manage the volume expansion because they don't only elongate, but they can also still a little bit go to the sides. So there is no really big rupture, yet they are able to host quite some lithium. And also when they deletiate, they can also get back to the original state. So there are many other examples, but I just probably named the most significant ones.
Very nice. I mean, this is fascinating. I'm glad you went through all the details because it clarifies for me, at least, you know, a lot more on the paper. Yeah. One thing that that I was also came to the realization looking at your paper, and actually I did some, you know, some research in Google and stuff, and I went to ResearchGate, and believe it or not, I started typing in there on how to make this titanium dioxide nanotubes, and I found 78 questions related to it. And they were primarily, hey, you know, I'm trying to make these nanotubes, but I can't, right? So I think it would be nice background to tell us at least, how do you make this and why do people have so much trouble getting these nanotubes to work?
Well, first of all, I think the process of making these tubes is relatively easy. You just take a piece of titanium metal, you put it in the electrolyte, you put some voltage on it, and if you do this well, for a certain time, like 1 hour, 2 hours, you end up with the nanotubes that I just showed. In the field of analyzation, this protocol is perceived as highly reproducible, highly reproducible. So I believe that those that could not easily make it are unfortunately people not really skilled in the art of analyzation, or people that might have overlooked something. But in general, I'm sorry to hear that someone failed, of course, but I always try to help those that ask me. So if someone would have a problem, they could have contacted me or other people in the field, and I'm sure we would give answers. But in principle, it's a very simple process, and there are not too many spots that can go wrong, actually.
Okay, very good. Thanks for the explanation. One thing also, since we are, a program about ALD, I wanted to ask you just one more follow-up question, because this is all entirely very interesting. We talked about this titanium dioxide nanotubes application to biology, to to volume crystals, and to battery usage. Where's the ALD part in here? How does ALD make this whole thing work better, if you will? How does it make these applications better than they could be without the ALD?
Well, I think the key issue is the offer that the coatings bring, because the coatings, of course, are composed of certain materials. Maybe I can put back this slide. And every chemical material has a certain intrinsic properties. So, for instance, when we study the alumina, the most basic one, it is a dielectric layer, and it's basically not really conducting. But if you put just very, very thin layer of it, like 1 nanometer or even less on these tubes, lithium can still go through it, for instance, but you prevent, during the charging and discharging, the formation of the secondary electrode interface layer, which is unwanted because that kills the capacity of the material underneath. So it's always a question about the composition of the ALD coating, the thickness of it, and it's always an interplay in between. So you have to look at different materials and try to extract from their best. And then if you can do such material in form of thin coating, for instance, on the nanotubes, then most likely you will end up with a success story.
Very good, very interesting, very nice. Thanks for the explanation.
Yeah. Sure.
Jan, this looks like very extensive research. What would you say throughout this process was the most surprising finding that you made?
Probably the most surprising was for me to see how even extremely small amount of material can change a lot. To be more specific, we have seen, for instance, when working with people in corrosion field or people that generally want to passivate their surfaces, like to make them, for instance, more stable or something, how incredibly thin the coating can be and work already very well. And we speak here sometimes even about 1 cycle ALD. So a process that takes a few seconds and you have your surface protected almost infinitely forever. So 1 atomic monolayer can do a great job. And this is for me absolutely most amazing thing. I have never even dreamed about that. So the key for us is not to do thick coatings. We are not interested in bulk materials like depositing micrometers. No, it's the opposite. We always try to extract as much as we can from ultra thin coatings, 1 cycle ALD, 2, 5 cycles maximum. And it's incredible how effective this is.
Why is that? Is it because you don't need to, or is it just to make to prove that concept for you? Why is it that you?
A little bit of everything. It's really because the property of the coating we put is so well tuned that it can be present only as a very thin atomic monolayer or bilayer, and it will already do the job very well. That's amazing. And of course, there is no other technique than ALD that could do that. So that's for me the most spectacular thing.
Okay. Well, thank you for explaining what you have done to us. What about now? What areas have you expanded to since then?
At the moment, there is quite a huge wave in 2D materials, not just graphene, but basically transition metal dechalcogenides like molybdenum sulfide, molybdenum selenide. These are very interesting materials that have similar properties as graphene or graphite, but now people try to make this essentially by ALD. And we are in the game. We have published some papers on ALD of molybdenum sulfides, recently also of molybdenum selenides, and these are really interesting 2D structures that you can grow by ALD, and that's actually really the cutting edge state of art where the ALD of 2D materials currently is. So we are doing that. We have our own synthetic chemists that help us to develop precursors for that, and we actually receive quite some attention with that, I have to say, and it's of course great.
Is that where you see kind of your future interest as well in terms of ALD research?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because not just the ALD tool we have from your company, but also the chemistries we're using and the robustness of the tool enables us to do these things without big issues. And I should also say that many people are afraid to produce sulfides or selenides, but we have completely avoided use of toxic species. We have precursors that are rather green. So we don't work with H2SA, for instance, which have selenium organometallic compounds that do the job, and they are completely fine. They don't smell, they are not really toxic. And so it's actually quite some development that has been done over past few years in that sense.
This might have an environmental impact on
absolutely
research.
And maybe I should also say something which is also quite cool, and that's the flow bed ALD. So it's the case where you can coat either very small, tiny particles, and you have to use a flow bed for that, or where you can, for instance, think about modifying nanofiber networks. You can put your fibers into these flow bed reactors, and you can put some coatings and modify the fibers. So that's absolutely spectacular function of the ALD that I recently exploited too, and that's actually also one of the things that we want to focus more in details in future.
Sounds great. I think we're about to reach our time for this talk today. Is there anything else you'd like to kind of share with the overall ALD community?
Well, I'm pleased to be part of it. I'm happy to see the developments. Of course, it's a fascinating technique and fascinating field. I'm very proud of this development, and it's just a pity that we cannot meet with all the fellas during our regular conferences and exchange knowledge, but I believe that good times will come again soon in that sense, and then we can continue further. And I wish everybody good luck in ALD life as well as in personal life. And thank you for inviting me again.
I do, Jan, I have one more question. This is something we ask for all the guests. What would you be doing as a career?
It's a very tough one, to be honest. I would probably still be scientist, but I think I would not have such a cool job anymore without ALD. I don't want to change it anymore, you know?
This is your coolness factor, yeah?
Yeah, it's the coolness factor. I really like to come into my work every day and see what else we can exploit in ALD, and it's driving me quite a lot, to be honest. So
good to hear, and I'm sure many of our listeners in the community can relate to that feeling. So, well, on that note, thank you once again, Jan, for being our guest, and let's keep in touch. And to everyone who's listening, we will share a video version of this podcast on our YouTube channel and our website of this podcast. So feel free to refer to the slides that Jan showed us earlier. And thank you for tuning in today. Have a great day.
You're listening to ALD Stories with Beneq, the home of ALD. To stay tuned for new episodes, make sure to follow us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, or Apple Podcasts. We hope you enjoyed today's show. Talk to you in the next one.